Hi, everyone. Welcome. I see some people coming in, so I'm just going to give one moment. While everybody is coming in, I want to first introduce myself. My name is Katie Starantino. I am the Director of Wellness Initiatives here at Friends Life Care. We have a really awesome presentation tonight, so I'm glad that you're here with us. And if you are around Montgomery County in Pennsylvania, it is a great day to be staying in and listening to a webinar because it's very rainy here. So I just want to give you a couple heads up before we get started. You'll see a chat box and a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to utilize those. We will be checking in at the end of the presentation to get all your questions answered. And our speaker today also has some resources for you to take home. And so now I'm going to introduce you to our speaker. She is Katie Reilly, a master's level gerontologist with over 13 years of experience in the senior care industry. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Gwynedd Mercy University, a master's degree in gerontology from St. Joseph's University, and is currently completing a PhD in leadership and gerontology with a research focus on ageism within senior living communities. So I will pass it over to you, Katie, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Katie, for the great introduction. It is so nice to be with everybody tonight on this webinar to really be talking about a topic that is such an interest and a passion to me. I would first like to start off with why this topic is so interesting and important to me. As Katie mentioned, I've been working as a gerontologist in the field of aging for over 13 years, and I have become keenly and unfortunately aware of the existence of ageism. For example, a lot of my career has been spent working in senior living communities where instances of ageism, often unintentional, were certainly seen among employees, family members, and even between residents. Things like utilizing what we call elder speak or baby talk, assuming that an older adult couldn't hear or they couldn't understand, assuming that they had cognitive impairment, or limiting their ability to make their own decisions and choices were just a few of the instances of ageism that were embedded in the culture of these communities. And this is certainly not the only area of aging where ageism, or really the only area in our society where ageism is widely apparent. And additionally, on a personal note, the number of times I am asked why I chose or would want to work in the field of aging is really immeasurable. And I find this to be a form of ageism, because most times this question is asked with a tone of disbelief or shock, or even a sense of aversion for the aging population. So encounters like that really just inspire me to continue to be an advocate for this topic. As Katie mentioned, my doctoral work is in ageism. My research is in ageism, and my passion for the topic really only grew as I started studying more about it in my doctoral work, really learning more about the myriad effects of ageism on older people. And as someone who chose to work in gerontology to really ensure receipt of proper care and the maintaining of dignity and respect for older adults, this topic has only become that much more of a passion. So some of the content of tonight's webinar are pieces from my doctoral dissertation, as I've taken quite a deep dive into the world of ageism. So just a brief overview of what I will cover tonight. We will be learning about what ageism is, how we define it, the origin of the concept, and even the origin of the term ageism, how we see ageism manifest in the lives of older people, some of the industries, just some, I won't go into all of them, but where we see ageism most prevalently, and examples of this, the specific impacts of ageism on the health and well-being of older people, and lastly, ways that we can try to combat ageism. And I also have resources for supplemental reading and supplemental information as well. So I will get started here. Whoops. Slide. There we go. So I think really, I think it's important to start off with a clear understanding of what the term ageism really means. And ageism is discrimination against any group based upon their chronological age. And as we can see in the definition on the slide there, it includes systematic stereotyping, which is how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act towards others based upon their age. While ageism can be exhibited or exist towards any age cohort, we see such discrimination towards older adults more than any other group, especially in Western parts of the world, such as the United States, unfortunately. And for the purpose of this webinar, that's what I will be focusing on, ageism towards older adults, and as well as the aging process. So throughout centuries of history, older adults were customarily respected and held in high regard as invaluable members of society, especially in certain cultures, and we still see some of that today. And that was a lot of times because of their knowledge, their wisdom. However, we see in modern society that there's a clear shift towards the devaluing of older people, particularly, again, as I mentioned, in Western parts of the world. This devaluing includes components of stigma, stereotypical thought patterns that, in turn cultivate ageist propensities towards the sector of the population that has lived the longest and fullest lives of any generational cohort to date. So I'd like to provide a brief bit of history regarding the term ageism, which was coined in 1969 by Dr. Robert Butler, medical doctor, and was the first director of the US National Institute on Aging. And confronting ageism was really a passion for Dr. Butler, and he demanded that the field of gerontology in particular deepen their study of its prevalence and impact on an aging society. And this was back in the 1960s, 70s. He truly was an advocate for ageism, and maybe a little bit ahead of his time, but in a really good way. Butler further described ageism as a form of bigotry that we tend to overlook, and a deep-seated uneasiness on the part of younger people and middle-aged people towards older people. It's seen as a personal revulsion and a distaste for growing old, for disease, for disability, and also coupled really with a fear of powerlessness, uselessness, and eventually death. So Butler had a very all-encompassing interpretation there. Because we're seeing such an influx right now of aging cohorts with baby boomers, and for example, by the year 2050, the number of people aged 60 and older is expected to more than double in number. The topic of ageism just becomes increasingly relevant to more and more older people, as well as younger people, as it hopefully should be. As such, ageist propensities continue to gain momentum with the influx of aging cohorts. A significant public health issue really emerges that is going to be threatening, and does threaten, the physical health, the mental health, the emotional well-being, and the quality of life of the aging population, which I will be talking about in a little bit more detail later on in the webinar. So ageism has also been referred as the third great ism after racism and sexism. And this term, I should say, was coined by a pretty well-known gerontologist in the field, Erdman Palmore. And he also described ageism as the ultimate form of prejudice, the last form of discrimination to be experienced in one's life, and the cruelest form of rejection. There really are three distinct aspects that comprise the epidemic of ageism. One is prejudicial attitudes towards older adults, as well as the aging process. And things like that can include feeling or believing that all older people are set in their ways, or they're stubborn, or feeling that everyone just develops dementia as they age, or simply just not liking someone because they're older. Two, we also see discriminatory practices against older adults, such as being passed over for a promotion due to their age, or not being considered for a medical intervention or a procedure because they're viewed as too old. And third, we also see, as part of this epidemic, institutional practices and policies such as mandatory or forced retirement. I want to spend a moment talking about something that I find the most interesting about ageism and hard to believe at the same time, and that is the great irony that really surrounds it, as it's the one form of discrimination that all people will experience eventually, regardless of our gender, our race, our ethnicity, our religion, our level of education. We all will experience ageism if we live long enough, which we're all really striving to do. And despite this reality of the universal potential of ageism, it still remains such a pervasive form of societal discrimination. So I want to talk about how we see ageism manifest, because it can happen in different ways. Amidst the overarching topic of ageism, we find that tendencies typically manifest in two distinct ways, either implicitly or unintentionally, or on the flip side, explicitly or more in an intentional way. Dr. Becca Levy, who is a professor at Yale University in the schools of both psychology and public health, has done a tremendous amount of research on ageism and its impact on older adults. And she finds that the element of subtlety is really the hallmark of that implicit form of ageism. And that can really be defined, that implicit ageism can be defined as, thoughts and feelings and behaviors towards older people that exist without our conscious awareness or real control over them. And this lack of conscious awareness may be due to the fact that ageism is a more commonly accepted form of discrimination today, unfortunately. Oftentimes, it really possesses a bit of a socially condoned nature. And oftentimes we see these ageist actions, attitudes, whatnot, as a more ingrained form of discrimination, to the point that it's not even recognized by society as discrimination. Additionally, the presence of negative viewpoints towards the aging process and older people, they're also often instilled in us from a young age, long before they hold relevance to us as individuals when we're younger, when we're kids, or the power to trigger discrimination. Because of this, ageist tendencies just kind of tend to occur unconsciously, as they're just so embedded both in us as people and in societal culture. So in direct contrast to the implicit form of ageism that we often see is explicit ageism, which includes attitudes and behaviors that are carried out knowingly, and they're knowingly discriminatory and stigmatizing. This form of ageism obviously has an element of blatancy to it. For example, not hiring an older adult simply because of their age. And this form may even prove more hurtful to individuals who are on the receiving end of that, because it really is seen as a deliberate action or a deliberate thought or a deliberate attitude. We also see ageism at the personal or the micro level through instances of personal threats to autonomy, privacy, well-being, as well as on the institutional or the macro level through things like housing and employment discrimination, mandatory retirement, as I mentioned before, and subpar or insufficient care and healthcare settings. I think with ageism too, it's important to note that we may also see ageism portrayed not just negatively, which is where our minds typically go to and where we see it most frequently, but there's also what we call positive ageism. And this can include positive perceptions or stereotypes, and examples of that can include, seeing all older people as the perfect grandparent, or assuming that all older adults collectively are wise or give excellent advice. These are examples of what we call positive ageism. But they may prove just as detrimental, because older adults may have a feeling that they, cannot live up to the perception of bestowing wisdom or giving advice simply because they are of an older age. I want to move into recognizing different areas where ageism is frequently seen. This list is certainly not exhaustive, but in my research, I have seen time and time again research about different areas such as these where we commonly see ageism. And I'll be talking more specifically on other slides about each of these, but we see, different outlets of the media, television, movies, online, things of that nature. Our everyday language, I'll be looking at instances of ageism there, the advertising and marketing industry, and then also the healthcare industry, which is the industry I work in. So that is, it's very close to home. So looking at the media, there are two main concerns when it comes to older adults portrayal in the media. And one is that they're underrepresented in television shows and movies. And the other concern is that they are frequently typecast to reflect our age-based biases that have been around for decades. This is known as visual ageism, which can be described as the social practice of visually underrepresenting older people or misrepresenting them in a discriminatory way. Such typecasting typically depicts older adults in a few different lanes, and that will be seeing them as being frail, seeing them as being confused or incompetent, eccentric, stubborn, narrow-minded, bad driver, which is one makes me cringe, or in poor health or being disabled. The danger of this homogeneous typecasting is that society then considers all older adults to be just like what they see on TV and in movies. And that just serves to further confirm preconceived notions and perpetuating the cycle of ageism. Examples of this are in lots of movies, lots of television shows. I'm sure we could all think of some if we sat and reflected about it. And I have done that quite a bit. And there's two examples that I would like to just describe briefly that can be seen. And then they're both well-known shows. And the one is The Office and the other is Saturday Night Live. And I'll start with the example from The Office. And many of you on the webinar tonight may be familiar with this show. It's a show that I love and it's very funny. But then this episode of The Office, Michael Scott, manager of Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, for those who may not be familiar, tries to present a quote unquote tutorial on avoiding ageism for the members of the office. And in trying to do so, he does the exact opposite in typical Michael Scott fashion, which is really the whole premise of the show. However, throughout this episode, there are distinct elements of ageism, glaringly obvious, like when Michael asks the group, when he brings them all into the conference room, as typically in every episode, why does our society hate old people so much? And there's a resounding answer from the office workers, because they're lame. Okay. Or particularly at the point of the episode when Michael brings in the founder of Dunder Mifflin Paper, an older gentleman aged 87, and he's brought in by Michael to try to share his wisdom with the office. And ageism is just abounding in this verbal exchange between Michael and Mr. Dunder, through utilization of language on Michael's part, such as calling him, you old fart, or you old bag of bones, did you just wander in off the street? Or when Michael refers to this gentleman as being 87 and still active, and says this in such a tone of utter disbelief, like you can't or you shouldn't be active at that age. And then lastly, when Mr. Dunder begins to tell the history of the paper company, and it becomes a bit of a longer story, and the cameras are cutting to different office employees who are rolling their eyes or they're falling asleep before Michael Scott pushes this older gentleman out the door, closes it to get him to stop talking, and really brings up the bias that older adults are seen as long-winded or boring, and no one just likes to listen to them and just kind of pushes them away. Yes, this is an episode of a very funny and comedy show, and it's also a very, very popular show. But in this episode, it's negatively portraying how to react to and treat an older person. And as a gerontologist, I think, wow, how many people just watch that episode and really reaffirm their own biases and thoughts and feelings and attitudes towards aging and older people? So that's the one example. The other example I'll use is from a Saturday Night Live sketch, again, a very funny, very popular show. And the sketch is a commercial, which they sometimes tend to do in between sketches. And this commercial is for what they're calling the Amazon Echo Silver, which is described in the sketch as designed for use by the greatest generation. In the parody, the actors are portraying older adults and exhibiting many common stigmas associated with aging. One, hearing loss is brought up, and it's brought up as a selling point of the echo as being super loud, so older people can hear it. Also, one of the actors is exhibiting confusion and forgetfulness, and this is seen as, the echo will answer to any name remotely close to Alexa, like Allegra, Allison, basically insinuating that older people they all are forgetful and won't remember things. It also cuts to an actor asking repetitive questions, and the Alexa will then reiterate the part of the conversation that was most recently forgotten. And then lastly, it cuts to an actor just telling a longer story, and the Alexa has the feature, which basically, again, is reiterating that older people are long-winded and boring, and we just them. While the sketch may be funny and on some level, I guess, and features of this parody Alexa device could even be helpful to older people, some of them, it also subtly, in the form of humor, again, reiterates aging stereotypes of hearing loss, of repetition, of cognitive impairment. And there's even a part of the commercial where one of the actors says, she's so cold and she's bundled under a bunch of blankets and it's a really hot summer day, and she asks the echo to turn up the heat. These subtleties are continuously cultivated by the media and the entertainment industries, not just in these two shows I mentioned, but they're providing society with no other option than perceiving older adults in a negative light and furthering the epidemic of ageism. So that is the concerns regarding the media. I also pulled up this image and I found this, and it really just struck me because I found it to be even more supportive and indicative of the negative portrayal of older adults in the media. This word jumble was put together by the Australian Human Rights Commission, and it was done to better understand discrimination against older adults in the media. And the Human Rights Commission polled over 2,000 respondents and asked the question, thinking about everything you see and you hear in the media, and that's TV, movies, online, radio, all of that, how does the media portray older people? And this word jumble are their responses. And the bolded bigger words are the words that came up again and again and again. And most of those words are negative in nature. More than half of these respondents who were polled, 61%, did say that this is not a fair portrayal of older people, but it's the reality. And it still signifies how much ageism, we really see in media outlets. And this was in Australia, but I think the same thing would be true here in the United States. I want to move into where we see ageism in everyday language through colloquial expressions that are humorously incorporated into our jargon, lacking regard for the ageist connotation that they might have. This language, which again is often learned from a young age, and it's just something that's second nature to us, becomes ingrained and is viewed as an acceptable way to characterize older adults, or acceptable things to say to them or about them or reference to them. Phrases like having a senior moment. How many times do we say that? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Over the hill. I think my dad still has a t-shirt from a birthday many years ago that said that. Little old lady, or grumpy old man, or you look good for your age. Phrases like this are really ageist and can be hurtful if we really stop to think about them. And they also can be reaffirming to older adults' own self-perceptions of aging, which is what we think about ourselves internally in terms of aging. There's even a game, as I was doing more research for this presentation, there's even a game called Senior Moments, if you can believe that. And it's a game about memory. And the tagline on Amazon says, you can't remember the last time you had this much fun. And also slightly alarming, it said this game was for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. But I thought that was just another everyday thing that we come across that when we stop and think about it, like, that is ageist. Also, something as little as a birthday card can be ageist. I'm not sure if those cards are able to be seen, but I will read them. The one on the left that's the front of a birthday card, and all of these can also be found on Amazon and ordered via Amazon Prime. The first one, again, it's a senior game show similar to Jeopardy, and the categories on the game show are facts I forgot, where I left my glasses, summer sweaters, early bird specials, aches and pains, and what did you say? So that's a birthday card that we would potentially send to someone who is aging. The one on the right, the top, the front of the card says, you know why older people drive so fast? Because before they forget where they're going. Again, kind of tapping into that stigma that older people are all forgetful as they age, which is far from the truth. And the second card on the bottom is the front of the card is actually called the senility prayer, which is just, wow. Can you imagine getting one of these or giving one of these cards to someone for their birthday? While they may be viewed as funny, again, I don't want to be a wet blanket, they may be viewed as funny, they're also associating getting another year older with a lot of negative things, and that is ageist. Again, wanting to look now more into the advertising industry, and we see ageism, we see older adults stereotyped through the marketing of products related to age-related ailments, ranging from things like laxatives, hair color products, to assistive devices. I chose the following ads because I think they really exude ageism, but there's a lot of them out there, more than I could ever put on a couple of slides. I'm not sure, the print on the one on the very top is very small, but it reads, see your mother on holidays, not every time you look in the mirror. Again, this is sending a message that we should avoid getting older, looking like our aging parents. The ad to the right of that, the older adult on the scooter, may promote an image and message that older adults are seen as handicapped or disabled. And the bottom ad is such a common image and an even more common phrase of help, I've fallen and I can't get up, and offers guidance for, it sounds like, children to purchase a life alert for an aging mother or father. While it is true that life alert buttons and scooters are helpful for individuals who need them, and they may be part of the aging process for some people, we also need to change the culture of advertising that these are not the only images or situations that we should see older adults representing. Aging is so much more than disability and decline. I also wanted to talk about, I couldn't not talk about the whole industry of anti-aging. The culture of resistance to aging is commonplace through the heavily commercialized need for anti-aging products, reflected in billions of dollars of cosmetic products and treatments that we see out there in the market. Research indicates that 90 million Americans each year purchase products or undergo procedures that are designed to hide physical signs of aging. And entire industries have been successfully built based upon the desire to slow or reverse the aging process, which really is an unattainable feat. We're getting older every day. But anti-aging culture sends a clear message to older people of the great avoidance, fear, disdain directed towards them, and ultimately reflects our ageist culture. The two ads that I chose on the slide, I think, are great examples of the avoidance of aging, with the taglines of "Stop aging now" and "Reverse the face of time." What kind of a message is this sending to not only older people, but all ages? If we stop and think about it, this is really also a discrimination against our future selves. I lastly want to look at the industry of healthcare, because that's one that is so critical to health, obviously, and well-being. It's important to recognize the prevalence of ageism in sectors of healthcare. As I mentioned earlier, with the influx of population aging, more older people are passing through, the vast spectrum of healthcare services, and subsequently they have the potential to encounter ageism. And ironically, within an industry that is committed to caring for health and well-being, the prevalence of ageism can impede such efforts and cause detrimental impacts. And we see ageism in a lot of different ways. And I've done a lot of research on this and have found a lot of unfortunate, realities through different studies that ageism is present in the, lack of consideration of older adults in certain clinical trials, lack of, physicians and other healthcare providers in pursuing geriatric medicine as a specialty, as well as sometimes the reluctance of healthcare professionals to pursue more aggressive treatments for aging patients. Not all practitioners, but there are some out there. A major component of healthcare ageism lies within clinical decision-making, where physicians might not include older patients in making choices about their care. They might assume that they won't understand, or they won't hear as well, or they might lack the capacity to make decisions, and they might defer to their family or to their powers of attorney. We might see healthcare providers sometimes talking in demeaning or patronizing tones to older people. Research also shows that physicians may show ageism in the diagnosis process, attributing abnormal symptoms and processes as age-related changes due to their own beliefs and attitudes. Because of these clinically ageist tendencies, ailments such as pain, chronic fatigue, cognitive impairment, depression, anxiety can often be attributed to normal aging, and they may go underdiagnosed or not treated for a long time, and will impact the health and well-being of older patients. And lastly, ageism can also be seen within senior living communities, which is what my research study has been about, because that is a sector of the healthcare industry, and where residents may be labeled as stubborn or difficult when they don't comply with care-related tasks within the timetable of the caregiver that is providing the care to them. I want to move into now talking about the impact of ageism that we see in different areas. And we see many physical ailments as repercussions of ageism. Physical health concerns such as heightened risk of cardiovascular events, poor balance, higher risk for falls, higher levels of stress, and even brain changes, including memory decline and other cognitive changes, and an overall decreased longevity, as well as an increase in risk-taking behavior such as smoking, drinking, poor diet, and medication compliance are all physical health concerns associated with ageism. Mental health concerns are also a big concern as well. Experiences of ageism are significantly predict poor mental health, diminished well-being, and quality of life. Specifically, encounters with ageism, research shows, served as a catalyst for depression, for anxiety, and for social isolation. Older adults who experience instances of ageism are likely to have negative self-perceptions of aging that they internalize, and those with negative self-perceptions are likely to report a higher level of depressive symptoms. We also see research that shows that ageism can be seen among healthcare practitioners because they may assume that feeling depressed or anxious, is attributed to normal aging, which is certainly not the case. Regarding longevity, we see research that ageism can actually shorten the lives of older adults. Older adults with more positive self-perceptions of aging live longer than those with negative self-perceptions, and the median rate of that was about 7.5 years living longer. Ageism can also accentuate feelings of dependency among older adults who are mistakenly and ageistly viewed as disabled, helpless, incompetent, and because of that, they have their thoughts and desires discredited and decisions are made for them, which impacts their autonomy. This treatment then will really perpetuate a self-fulfilling prophecy, impacting older adults' self-perceptions of aging and kind of remaining this sick cycle of dependency. Research supports the reality that exposure to age stereotypes impacts older adults' help-seeking behavior, as older adults with more negative age stereotypes ask for help more frequently, and in turn, again, increase their dependency. And all of these different areas of impact were further confirmed by a recent 2020 study completed by the Yale School of Public Health. In this study, the research team examined the health consequences of ageism, and they found evidence that it harmed health of older people in 45 countries across 5 continents. They actually were looking at about 7 million participants. And this study was originated by the World Health Organization as a part of their global campaign to combat ageism. And the research analysis, what they did was they reviewed 422 studies around the world that were pertaining to the impact of ageism. And 96% of the studies reviewed, there was evidence of adverse effects of ageism. And those effects include the things that I mentioned before, like depression, and also shortened life expectancy. So when we're talking about ageism, it's really important that we hear directly from older adults regarding their encounters with bias and other forms of discrimination in their daily lives. What are their experiences with ageism? So there was a national poll done on healthy aging, and it was carried out by the University of Michigan's Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation, coupled with AARP. And they polled more than 2,000 adults between the ages of 50 and 80, and this was done the December before COVID. And they wanted to know about their experiences regarding ageism. And as you can see from the infographic, at least 82% of participants experienced one or more forms of ageism in their daily lives. 65%, it was more exposure to ageist messages and things that they read or things that they watched, like TV, like movies, things of that nature. 45% of people experience ageism in interpersonal interactions. That would have been maybe with coworkers, in the workplace, family, friends, community, just society at large. And then 36% were found to also have internalized age stereotypes, such as thinking things like feeling lonely or depressed. That's just a natural part of aging, which, as we know, is not considered to be a natural part of aging, or should not be considered a normal part of aging. And then lastly, 40%, which is not on this slide, but 40% of the people that were polled, they stated that they routinely experience 3 or more forms of ageism. And this group of 40%ers were more likely to have poor mental and physical health. So I think it's important to really end with some strategies and some tools. We've talked about how harmful ageism is and where we see it and when we see it, but how do we eradicate it? How do we address it? And I think that's really the most important takeaways from tonight's webinar. So I think the first thing is having awareness. Having a webinar like this, kudos to Friends Life Care, talking about ageism, bringing it up in conversation. And, as we're talking about it, acknowledging our own biases is a great first step in eradicating ageism. It's no longer going to be this subtle, we just accept it and it's just a part of who we are and our culture. No more. Going hand in hand with awareness, I think, is education. Learning more about what ageism is. Again, this webinar is a first step in that. What is ageism's impact on health, on well-being, especially, again, that operative word being subtle, those subtle instances where we may see it. Also becoming more educated about the aging process, what aging involves, what it doesn't, what's normal, what's not normal, is another effective way to dispel ageist inaccuracies and stigma. I think a significant contributing factor to the prevalence of ageism is the lack of society's accurate knowledge of the aging process, which might lead to undue anxiety about aging, and then in turn, negative attitudes about aging in older people. So ensuring an accurate picture of aging while emphasizing the positive aspects, because there are some there, can be achieved through educational interventions, which may lessen anxiety and ageist tendencies among younger cohorts who may be exhibiting the most ageism. I also think changing the stigma of what it means to age is important. And as aging cohorts continue to evolve, so will the perception of what it means to age. Older people should be encouraged and supported to remain active, pursue old and new hobbies, continue to work later in life, continue educational pursuits, embrace technology, travel, and lead happy, productive, and successful lives in whatever way is meaningful to them. I think the baby boomer cohort is truly changing the face of aging in so many positive ways. And being able to see, thriving and fulfilled aging cohort will help younger generations see aging in a new light, and hopefully reduce their own preconceived notions that aging is just getting older, going to a nursing home, which it's not, and not continuing to experience all that life has to offer, which truly is what aging is and should be. I also think intergenerational contact is a really big piece of a strategy to combat ageism. And a lot of my research has also been on the benefits of intergenerational exposure early in life and how that manifests and impacts our age bias as adults. Encouraging and engaging in interactions between older and younger cohorts is so critical. Such interactions can help break down stereotypes on both sides, because ageism can go both ways for sure. Cornell University, a gerontologist there named Carl Pillemer, he finds that if we teach people more about aging, they're less frightened by it, they're less negative about it, and they're less uncomfortable interacting with older people. That really, really helps. The literature and the research that I have done provides support to the idea that early intergenerational relationships lead to positive age stereotypes and greater respect for older people and value of them in adulthood. And such relationships don't just have to be with grandparents, other influential older people, neighbors, community members, volunteer programs in schools or in churches that offer that consistent relationship building can also offer meaningful opportunities for engagement between younger and older people. And then lastly, see something, say something. If we hear an ageist comment, we see something happening that's not age friendly, speak up if we can. And that's easier said than done, I know, but speak up if we can, and speak up in the moment. It's important to challenge these instances that we see of stigma and bias to change the tide of ageist culture. So addressing such comments as best we can in the moment, and then having a conversation about it, if that's possible, can change attitudes and bring real change, and just confront ageism, head on right then and there. Lastly, I really want to wrap up this part of the presentation, then I'll move into some of the supplemental resources. But the attainment of reaching advanced age is a segment of the life course that should be met with dignity, respect, and great value. However, while it should be valued by younger age cohorts, it's often not the case, as aging continues to be the most highly stereotyped segment of the life course, as I've talked about throughout tonight. The damaging components of ageism, coupled with its societal prevalence and ironic potential to impact any one of us lucky enough to reach the most advanced age, is a concern that certainly warrants recognition and real change and advocacy, in the hopes that will transform the skewed perceptions that we have of what aging is and what it means to grow older, both for current cohorts as well as for our future selves as well. So I wanted to just provide additional resources if anyone is interested in learning more or getting more into advocacy, or just taking a deep dive like I did. I've gone through a lot of these resources, or some of my favorites, and I just wanted to share, and there are a lot of different modalities of them. Ageism.org, I should say, is a great place to start. They're a great nonprofit, and they have comprehensive ageism education there, as well as lots of ways, more than what I talked about, tips to and strategies to combat ageism. Leading Age is a national organization that represents so many, I think over 5,000 nonprofit aging service providers. And actually their vision is an America freed from ageism. So they have what I think is really interesting dialogue guides on their website that can help start conversations within different areas. So they have one about the workplace, they have one about with friends, with family. They have a lot of great podcasts there, which are great. The one thing that I find so interesting about what Leading Age does and regarding ageism is they put together a whole set of resources for teachers and for school districts, elementary and middle school, and I guess high school maybe, but regarding those 100-day celebrations that many schools have to commemorate 100 days of school. And a lot of times they'll have days, they call it dress like a 100-year-old. But Leading Age, coming from the lens of ageism, feels that that can reinforce stereotypes about aging that aren't always positive. So they've given a lot of consideration and a lot of ideas to school districts, to other alternatives that will promote positive interactions and positive perceptions, things like inviting a 100-year-old to the class to speak, or going to visit a local aging agency, which I think is really interesting and something we don't think about all the time. But again, it's getting those positive perceptions early in the life course with school age kids. The TED Talk, Let's End Ageism by Ashton Applewhite. Ashton Applewhite is a fearless leader in the world of anti-ageism-ness. She's an advocate. She also wrote the book, This Chair Rocks. It's fantastic. She's a great blog. Her website's fantastic. Definitely check that out. For any professionals on the call, the Gerontological Society of America put out an ageism first aid kit, which is, I think, more for professionals. But it has different modules that are geared to encouraging use of positive aging-related language that are specifically for people in the helping and the healthcare professions, which I think is huge, as I talked about how much healthcare can exude ageism. And then lastly, I did include the World Health because they do have the information on the global campaign to combat ageism, but they have a lot of other resources. There's so much out there. These are just some of my favorites and some things to get you started if you're interested in learning more and really advocating as well. So I wanted to leave about 15 minutes here for any questions or more even comments. I think, as I said in my strategies and tips, it's all about a dialogue and raising awareness and education. So I'll kind of open it up now.
Thank you, Katie. And for everyone on the call, you will be getting Katie's resources in about 24 hours. You'll get an email from Zoom that will give you all those resources. So let's see what we have here in questions. Marge says that in her area, there are a few gerontologists, and those that do practice only have concierge practices. She finds that discriminatory in itself.
I would agree. And I think that lends itself to the interest in geriatrics as a specialty. And I agree with that comment for sure. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Even universities are closing their gerontology programs, even though we have so many more people aging. It's kind of backwards.
And do you think that's the reason that people aren't going into geriatrics is related to ageism?
I do. I absolutely do. And that's just my experience. But I do think that in my work and in my schooling, people will say, why would you want to work with older people? Well, why not? And I think a lot of it is due to what they think older aging is, or their experience with older people hasn't always maybe been positive, and that's just what they think about. But there's so much more. And I think education is just a great way to just kind of dispel that.
Right. Yeah. Our next question, are medical schools now addressing ageism with students? Doctors seem to be the worst offenders.
Yes, and I know for a fact that's a great question. Drexel actually does a course in the medical school, which they actually pair with paramedical students with, I forget which senior living community it is, but they pair medical students and they do like a profile on an older person, and they kind of take the whole semester in this one particular course. I forget the name of it, but they kind of have a medical student and an older adult, and they kind of pair them up and take a journey together and just learn about them, just to kind of get them more familiar, or have more of a rapport, or just more of a value of the older population. So I don't know about other schools, but I do know Drexel does that I've heard about that course. It's wonderful. I think at the end of the semester, they have like a whole portrait of the person that they present, and it's really nice.
Yeah, that does sound excellent. Hopefully more schools will start to do that work. Is there still an active chapter of the Gray Panthers in Delaware Valley? I don't know if you've heard of the Gray Panthers, Katie.
I have heard of the Gray Panthers, but I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. But I have heard of them, and I've heard of Maggie Kuhn, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But that is a good question.
That's a good question. If anyone else knows, please write it in the question box, and we'll read it out.
I'd like to know.
Next comment is the fact that doctors stopped doing PSA tests and colonoscopies for people over 80 a form of ageism or a realistic cost benefit calculation?
That's a really good question. And I think it could probably go both ways. I'm sure there are a lot of cost benefits to that, but then I think, what if someone over 80 does have a concern related to PSA or colonoscopy and they're not getting that critical test? I do think that could be ageist. And I think maybe cost and economics and financial things play a role in that as well, and maybe perpetuating ageism in the medical field in particular. Yeah, that's a great point.
That's a really good comment. We have Jerry here saying ageism is a public health hazard on highways or sidewalks as well, where older people just aren't moving fast enough for some impatient people. Any suggestions for dealing with this?
So true. And, I think we all have impatience at times. And I think I'm a huge advocate on education. And if people just are educated and have more awareness of how they're acting and the perspective and the lens coming from an older person who, maybe why they might be moving a little bit slower, that's going to change the mindset, I think. I certainly acknowledge, like, there is a lot of that out there. It's also a lot of the times on the road with driving. This is more about sidewalks, I think, but even driving, we have to have patience. We have to have, be mindful of older people. And I think that starts with giving people awareness and education. I don't know how we do that for the whole entire world, but I think we need to.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, if you're walking, Jerry, and someone's, pretty close to you, I think what Katie's saying is that awareness of saying, I'm feeling a little rushed by you right now, but of course on highways, you can't do that. And I will say I'm in my early 30s and I feel rushed on the highways because people just drive in such a crazy manner.
I agree.
We have Darlene here saying, I feel that going into a 55 plus gated community or independent living too soon perpetuates ageism and would make me feel old and would be depressing for me.
I think that's an interesting point. And my question there is, in the independent living or the 55, like, what is the culture there? Is the culture perpetuating ageism? Are there programs and are there, lots of excursions and things to be involved in that promote healthy, successful aging, quality of life? Or is the culture there more that doesn't do that? I think that would be a great question. Why would you feel old? Is it because the community kind of exudes that culture? I'd be interested to know that, but it's a good point.
An excellent question to ask if you're looking into these communities to look at what their activities calendar looks like.
And maybe they need education on ageism.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love all these coming in. Well, we had I think a follow-up for Darlene that said some of these require a money commitment and then you're stuck if it doesn't work out. So
for sure. Yes, and that's a real factor there. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a really great comment here. Asian cultures respect age. The reason I volunteered to serve Asian American students as an academic advisor. Hopefully Asian Americans will keep that aspect rather than adopting our ageism perspective.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that comes from that concept of filial piety that is so a part of the Asian culture, the Hispanic culture. Some of my research I'm doing, I'm looking at that culture as a part of that, and speaking with some Asian Americans that I've been doing research with, they hope that it stays that way, but they do talk about how, as with our culture, there's life gets busy, there's work, there's other obligations. And a couple of people I've spoken with do see a little bit of that waning, where older adults aren't taken care of by their families. They're not multi-generational homes like we might have seen before. So I agree with this comment that they will keep that that value. I mean, that cultural value. I mean, I think that's what we should emulate. As me as a gerontologist, I think that for sure. But I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I recently read something about the blue zones. I think they called it the grandparent effect, and just the impact on your own health as an aging person and your loved ones when you're involved in caretaking and things like that with the family. And we don't do that as much here.
Yeah,
So
I agree with that.
Our favorite nurse practitioner here, Kirsten, asking, how do we spread awareness to the general population regarding ageism? We speak of medical students requiring rotations in the geriatric community, but it really should be more widespread.
Totally agree with that. It should be everybody. And I think just in my work and my research, it should start in schools. I do. I think it should start with kids, with young people. You know, why can't we have a course on positive aging in school? And we can fine tune that to the grade or the type of age of student. But I think that's where we started. That's where we kind of change those potentially ingrained perceptions when we're young. And then that will hopefully, you know, have a ripple effect as we move through the world as adults, I would think. I mean, I think that's where it starts. It's a good question. Important one.
I think what you're saying today, Katie, with the awareness, everybody that's here on this call, you can make a difference. You can tell your loved one, oh, I was on a call about ageism. There's one thing I learned. And I think that's perfect.
I found in my research how many people don't know what the term ageism is. And that's okay. But so many people I interviewed really had never heard of it before or didn't know what it was. And it can go both ways. And older people can certainly have bias towards younger cohorts. But I think just acknowledge, you know, what is ageism? Like letting people know what it is. That's where we start with the iceberg.
And Patricia is telling us that it was very informative and thanking you. And thank you for that comment, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm glad you were here.
So I want to give everyone a couple more moments to put a question in. And while you are doing that, I am just going to remind you, we have two exciting things coming up. On Thursday, April 28th, we have Dr. Jay Pomerantz, who's going to discuss how targeting fundamental aging factors may prevent the onset of age-related diseases. And then we start a 4-week Get Fit While You Sit class on Monday, May 4th at 9 a.m. Looks like we've got another question here. Oh yes, Darlene talking about she hates when promotions for senior living places are talking to her kids, not her. That's huge.
I agree, Darlene. You know, why they should be talking to you. You're perfectly capable. Like that's another form of ageism, just deferring to other people, children, whatever, whoever it might be. That is ageist.
Yeah,
on that note.
Really great questions and comments. You'll get the resources from Katie in the email. When you log off today, you'll get a survey. Please answer that. Please let us know how we're doing, what you want to see more of. I really appreciate your feedback there. And Katie, this was great. Thanks for being here with us today. Everyone can look for the recording in their email as well.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.